Subscribe or they will haunt you.
Serious? What the creepiest, scariest thing you seen but no one believes you? No one ever believes me when I tell them this except the few people that are involved. My dad thinks we are just too imaginative, even though my mom and I will tell the exact same stories at different times, never having talked to each other. But anyway, here's what I have to contribute. It's a copy and paste BTW. I've told this story on Reddit before. My story starts when I was roughly 8. My parents bought an old farmhouse that's over 100 years old. We found newspaper clippings in the wall when they renovated it from 1864. I had 2 brothers at the time and we were all outside playing, and they had a tendency to pick on me. So I decided I was done putting up with it and went in the house to tattle, as year-olds do. I yelled several times for my mom and finally got back. "What is it, dear?" Not seeing her, I yell, "Where are you?" Again I hear a voice, "I'm over here, dear." I don't see her and call out again. This repeats about 4 times, and as I get closer and the voice gets louder, I passed by a window and glanced out to see my mom and dad out in the distance working on a tractor. My heart jumps into my throat and I book it outside. My brothers are exactly where they were when I went in, so I know it's not one of them messing with me. Throughout the years I hear voices and TVs and strange noises constantly throughout the house, but just assume I'm hearing things. Move up a bit to me being 17. Parents left town for a few days and I had some friends come over. Night starts off normal, we play some video games and all is well. 2 of my friends need to use the bathroom, so one goes downstairs and one stays upstairs since there's 2 bathrooms in the house. First friend comes back from the bathroom and says, "Yay, yes, really funny guys," to the 3 of us that are in the room. We have no idea what he talking about. He said banging on the door and making weird sounds while I'm taking a piss. So funny. We are all genuinely confused as we haven't moved. He doesn't believe us but sits down and rejoins the group. Now the second friend comes back from downstairs and has a similar complaint. He says we were bouncing a ball, shuffling things around, laughing outside the door, and heard us run off when the toilet flushed. We again are confused, especially since there weren't enough of us to mess with both of them at the same time. Conversation kind of drops, but neither seem convinced we did nothing. A couple hours go by and for some reason the conversation comes up again. We deny it, they DPNT believe it. Eventually that turns into jokes about ghosts and how we disturbed them when the house was remodeled. I was about 13 when we started remodeling. Jokes continue and someone said, "Ah, come on now, you can't really believe that ghosts exist?" And everyone is like, "Nah, they probably don't." On the other side of the room is a single fold closet door, and right as we said that, this door explodes, opens so violently that the folds slam together and bounce almost back shut. We immediately end that conversation, flip every light in the house on, and no one dared to touch that door. The next day I wanted to make sure something didn't fall, but as I opened the door there is nothing close to the door, nothing big enough that even could have fallen to slam that door open. Move forward to me being 20 and telling my mom of the weird things that I witnessed. She tells me, "Oh, I know there's at least a family of 3 that I know of. 2 little boys, one always has a bouncing ball and the other giggles a lot, and an old man." I hadn't even gotten to that part in my story. Edit. Dear cause apparently this is a hot button issue for you all. When I was a kid, I used to stay at my grandparents' house a lot. They had that house for as long as my mom has been alive, possibly even longer. All I know is that the history of the property is still unknown to this day. Anyways, I used to stay in my mom's old childhood room. It was called the Purple Room due to the purple carpet and the lavender wallpaper. It was a pretty big room with a queen-sized bed in the middle and a humongous window right next to it. During the summer I would frequently stay at that house and spend a lot of time in that room. One night, I vividly remember waking up late at night, probably 1 or 2 in the morning, and seeing a puppet show outside my window. I wish I was making this up. They were hand sock puppets, and it looked like it was only performed by 1 or 2 people. It was only a shadow of this performance, which threw me off. So of course I assumed I was still a little tired and totally out of it, and imagining the whole thing, I decided to brush it off my shoulder and ignore it. Oh man, do I regret that. As soon as I turned over on my right side, there in the doorway was a large black figure. It was pitch black out in the hallway, but I could clearly see a figure standing there. My stomach sank and my heart started beating quickly. I was wide awake now. I blinked a few times, and I swear every time I did, it got a little bit closer. When it got arm's length away from me, that when I felt my heart stop beating completely and my body turning cold. I swear I could see my breath because of how cold it is. I was able to muster up a scream that woke up both of my grandparents and brother from their deep slumber. My grandma was the first one to come into my room, but as soon as she flicked the lights on, it was gone, never to be seen again. I was sobbing and trying to tell her what I saw, but she just kept stroking my hair and saying I was just having a bad dream. I know that was a dream and what I saw was real. I also believe that this thing that I saw as a child has followed me when I moved to a different state. I was about 6 or 7 when this happened, and I'm 16 now. To this day, no one believes me. This makes me sound fucking crazy, but anyways, it was a warm summer morning back when I was a kid. I was standing in our hallway, putting on my shoes, when I randomly peeked into our living room and saw a see-through male figure surrounded by rainbow-colored lights standing right in the middle of the living room. He was reading a book and didn't seem to notice me. I thought it was weird, but I didn't feel scared or anything. It felt like the room was filled with a warm, loving energy, if that makes sense. I kinda just shrugged it off and went about my day, probably because I was too young to really understand what I'd seen. A few days later, when my mom tucked me into bed, she read me a bedtime story about a kid who meets an angel, or something like that. Don't remember the story exactly, but what is interesting is the author's description of what that angel looked like. It was exactly the same as the strange rainbow man I had seen in our living room a couple of days before. It even said that angels will often visit humans surrounded by a strong rainbow-colored lightning and manifest themselves while reading a book. I casually blurted out, "Oh, I've seen an angel then," and my mom was like, "You have? That's great." And we didn't talk more about that for a while, until one day where I randomly asked my mom if I could see a picture of my granddad who died unexpectedly while my mom was pregnant with me. She found an old family album and we looked through pictures of my parents' wedding that happened exactly 1 year before I was born. There was a picture of 3 or 4 people sitting together, laughing and having a great time at the party. I immediately pointed out the guy who sat in the middle and said, "How funny, he looks just like the angel I saw," and my mom's face turned white as a ghost. She was just about to tell me that this was indeed my deceased grandfather who I never got to meet. I'm very convinced it was him visiting me. Growing up, I had a friend named Adam. He was never able to come out during the day, only right before all of us kids had to go home for the evening. Adam lived a few houses over, in a house with an overgrown yard. I met his parents once. They were very strange, didn't smile, and obviously didn't want me there. I remember Adam telling me that he was sick. That's why he couldn't play that much. He was a small boy, pale with dark hair. Eventually, Adam stopped showing up altogether, and I eventually moved on. Though, I do remember going to his house a couple times to see if he could come play, and his dad just gave me this look before closing the door in my face. Later in life, I asked my sister if she remembered him. She doesn't, and according to my parents, that house was empty the entire time we lived there. I don't know who Adam was. I don't know why I so vividly remember him and his parents. As far as I can tell, he wasn't real, and yet I have perfect memories of him and his parents. About 8 years ago now, I was taking a drive out to Kansas from the East Coast. I was with a friend and we were going out to see her grandparents. Once we were about 2 hours from the grandparents' house, my friend starts outlining standard operating procedures of seeing things in and around her family home. She seemed a bit panicky when going over everything, but I managed to calm her down. I skeptical of everything and assured her that the things she had seen when she was a small child were just manufactured in her imagination. She insisted that the entire family had seen these things, with the exception of her grandparents. 2 hours later, we arrive in Kansas, and I ready to fall over because of the length of time the last leg of the trip took. We are welcomed and grandmother takes me to a back bedroom, and just as she about to close the door, she stops, says maybe you shouldn't stay in this room, and escorts me to another room. Okay, that was a little strange, but whatever. I tired. Fast forward to night number 2 at the grandparents' home. It around 11 p.m. and my friend is crashed out on the couch watching TV. I in an adjacent bedroom from which I can see her laying on the couch. I nod off for the night and wake up to a old gray man that bared a resemblance to the grandfather, but was not the grandfather, standing with his back to me in the doorway looking at my friend sleeping on the couch. I decided I was going to get up and confront the old gray man, and something slammed me back into the bed. I tried to get up several more times with the same result. Each time I was slammed back into the bed, a voice would repeat, "Put a seal on the door." Finally, I snapped to at 3 a.m. and everything was normal. I must have been sleeping. It was a dream. No old gray man, and my friend was fast asleep. So I start pacing around the room trying to decide how I feel about what had just happened. I glance over to my friend. Her eyes are open and she says, "You seen it?" I say, "Get in the car. I can be here right now." We spend the next 4 hours sitting in a Walmart parking lot talking about the history of her experiences in that house and comparing to my own. Okay, my nerves are not on fire anymore, and we are heading back to the grandparents' home. We arrive and they are waiting for us inside. I tell them exactly what happened to me and I get, "Yeah, that's strange. We usually do seal our doors with a prayer at night, but with all the excitement we just must have forgotten. All the children have mentioned stories of things, but we have never seen them. We are sorry you had to go through that. I really not sure what I seen or experienced that night." But when I tell people, they get that look of skepticism. It's obvious they don't believe me. My conclusion is that the experience wasn't distinguishable from reality in the moment. I don't know what that means, but it changed the way I look at things. This was 4 years ago. As I was walking on the sidewalk on a busy afternoon, I saw a suspicious boy, man about 18. He was 10 meters away and walking what it looked like towards me. I kept my eyes on him despite the fact that he was and looking directly at me. His eyes were roaming, jumping from an object to an object. As we approached one another, half a meter away from each other, he takes out a knife and tries to stab me in my left side. He was and really fast. So I easily dodged it and immediately turned to see who is he, or if he is trying to stab me again. To my surprise, he continues walking, and after a couple of meters he stops, turns around, smiles, and gives me thumbs up. Then he continues walking in the opposite direction. Till this day I don't know who he was, what he wanted, and even my family does and believe me, because if someone wanted to stab you, you can stop him. You are inexperienced enough to dodge it like that, and something of that kind. As a Marine, I used to have the graveyard patrol shift at the Beirut bombing memorial. Part of the memorial is dedicated to a veterans cemetery. Oddly enough, I never got freaked out being completely alone in a remote cemetery in the middle of the night, surrounded by dense woods on all sides. It was actually kind of peaceful, to be honest. However, one night I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the oldest headstones are when I heard the sound of a woman humming. I followed the sound and noticed a light glowing through the vines and brush of a large tree. As I approached, I could literally feel my hair beginning to lift as if there was an electric current in the air. I pushed aside the brush, and what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was an old, weathered headstone with a large cross etched into the marble. Only the cross was glowing a bright, vivid blue like a neon bulb. The humming was also suddenly much louder and had a weird plurality to it, like it was coming from hundreds of voices at once. Needless to say, I freaked the fuck out. I screamed like a scared little girl and sprinted back to the parking lot. I radioed the guard who was supposed to relieve me and forced him to come early, then spent the rest of my shift in the cab of his truck. I don't think he believed me, but he stayed in his truck and didn't go out on patrol until the sun was fully up. A few days later, I worked up the nerve to return to the grave. During the day, of course, as I suspected, in the light of day it was a completely mundane headstone. There was no name, only the aforementioned cross. I ran my hands over the stone and checked to see if maybe there was some sort of hidden light source or solar panel. But no, it was just plain, solid, unremarkable stone. The humming was gone, too. I eventually returned to my normal shift, but never again experienced anything out of the ordinary. I never learned whose grave it was, either, but I find myself thinking about it from time to time. It certainly sounds absurd when I say it out loud, and I suppose it could have been a hallucination or a trick of my tired brain, but I don't believe it was. I think it was real. A ghost or spirit of some sort, but I don't think it was malevolent at all.